First of all, I would like to welcome you to this third webinar. It's a great honor to host a very distinguished guest and brother, actually, a dear friend, Dr. Amar Darrag. He's one of the outstanding Egyptian politicians, and also he's a very established scholar. He's an expert in US relations. He's also that man of a special gift of oratory and actually presentation. It's really very honoring having him with us today. I would like, first of all, to thank you for joining from different countries. We have people from India, Malaysia, also Turkey and other parts of the world. So we extend this welcome and also greetings to all of them. Our lecture today will be about the US policies towards the Middle East, especially our part of the world. Dr. Amar is an expert in international relations. He is the Minister of Planning and International Cooperation. He was during Morsi's tenure. He is the founder and chairman of the Egyptian Institute of Political and Strategic Studies, based here in Istanbul. He is the Secretary General of the Constituent Assembly, drafting the 2012 Egyptian Constitution. He is a member of High Commission and co-founder of Freedom and Justice Party. He holds actually a lot of position. It seems very difficult to grasp and to tell them all, but basically he is an engineer by profession. He has got a PhD in engineering from the United States in 1987. I would like to welcome him again. First of all, we'll have his talk. After that, we'll be playing a very short video. And after that, we'll go into discussion, whether it's comments or questions. I leave the floor for Dr. Amr. Dr. Amr, please.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. It is really my pleasure to be here talking to you today. Brother Dr. Muhammad Makram, Jazakallah khairan for your hospitality and for the invitation, inviting me to speak in front of the current distinguished group of people. I see people from different parts of the world, which gives me a great pleasure, actually. And probably I have to be thankful for the coronavirus allows us to to explore this technology and be able to talk to our brothers and sisters all over the world in just a matter of a click of a button. So my talk today is going to be a twofold. It is partly on the United States and partly on the Middle East in relation to the United States. So the United States is a common factor in my talk, and I will probably talk about the variables, about what has been going on in the United States before the coronavirus, then briefly on the developments over the last few months, 3 months specifically, and based on that, what, from my opinion, will be the repercussions on the US policies in the Middle East. First of all, we have been witnessing a lot of changes on the international arena over the last probably 20 years. And maybe the changes are not very much noticeable unless you are a follower, you are a political scientist or a political practitioner, or somebody who is interested in international relations. whoever is following actually literature that is going around in the world and also trying to observe what's happening is seeing consistently some changes that have been happening during the last maybe 10, 20 years. And what the coronavirus virus has done actually is that it expedited a lot of what is happening very quickly. It concentrated and condensed whatever is happening in a way that non-specialists are now able to see what is happening very much magnified. I'm going to explain that in a minute. I will just, I would like to give credit, a good part of my presentation. I made use of excellent lectures by Dr. Sami Al-Aryan from Salah ad-Din Zaim University, SIGA Center. He gave actually, I think, 3 presentations on the US over the months of Ramadan, including a lot of valuable data on the United States, on the, if you will, the factors that resulted in the hegemony of the United States all over the world, and some of the characteristics that are shown for a recession of this kind of economy. So I would like to, I'm not going to go a lot into all of the details, of course. That has been the talk of like maybe 4 or 5 hours, but I would very much recommend that you go back and see these lectures. Sometimes at certain points, I'm going to make use of some of the figures and arguments that he presented. And then I will move to the part of the Middle East. The United States, particularly after the World War II, have been in a position of leading the world. I'm not going to go into the reasons for that, but the world order, particularly after the World War II, was clearly led by the United States. United States is using many things in order to make sure that this kind of control continues and is sustainable and it's not disputable by anybody. They have a huge defense budget. Actually, the spending on the military spending in the U.S. exceeds maybe the following, maybe 7 or 8 states ranked after the U.S. When it comes to the military spending altogether. We're talking, I think, about a budget of maybe right now 700 or 800 billion US dollars every year. And as a result of that, this allows the US to maintain a huge network of military bases all over the world that controls, basically controls everything all over the world, controls the oceans, controls navigation, and constitutes presence in front of any kind of threat that could constitute the United States. The other thing is, I would like please from my brother who is having the mic on mute.
دكتور عمرو بعد إذنك يبدو إنه صوتك
القرآن أو التحدث مع بعضنا، فبالتالي الآن نص ساعة هي الفترة لاستعادة
Well, somebody is not muted and he is
نص ساعة ومن ساعة.
Okay, sorry about that. So so the military dominance is very clear. The second point is the economy, the huge economic advantage that the United States have. First of all, it has a very strong economy in itself, but more importantly, the United States is the only country in the world that is capable of printing as much US dollars, which is the national currency, as it wants, because actually the whole, maybe more than 60% of the trade in the world is traded in US dollars, including, of course, most importantly, oil. So they don't lack money, and they can keep printing without stopping. So this maintains a very huge economy. It covers the huge debt of the United States, even يعني allowing the US to pass different crises time after time. And this is not available to any other country in the world. Of course, the technological advantage is huge. The cultural dominance is huge through Hollywood, through TV, through music. So the US is taking the #1 seat in the world. We know about that. But during the last few years, as I was saying, some changes have been happening, including the questioning of the new liberal model, or even the liberal model itself, the democratic liberal model itself. We know and we remember, like 20 years ago, Francis Fukuyama called for the end of history, and that's it. I mean, the US is going to control the whole world forever. But after that actually, things started to change. And what we see right now is not just a recession of the attractiveness of the American model for the world, for the whole world, but actually a recession even within the United States itself, within the liberal world. We see a lot of literature right now talking about the crisis that the democratic liberal model is going through. And then, of course, this is not our topic, but I'm just giving this as an important observation. But people now are complaining about the control of a small percentage of elite of everything, controlling politics, controlling media, controlling the economy, business, everything is being controlled by a very small percentage of people. This is for the United States and also for other countries that have been following the same model. But if we concentrate on the US, it is, as Dr. Sami has been explaining, it is very difficult for anybody to get into the top elite that is going into politics. You have to be supported by large corporations, by groups of interests. You have to have access to a huge amount of money, and the issue of representation itself is being questioned right now in the US. Of course, media. This is very clear beyond explanation. Very few media outlets are controlling the narrative, and it's only letting out what they would like people in the US and all over the world to hear. The main problem in the US, which leads to a big social problem that we are probably seeing right now, is the control of a very small percentage of people of most of the economy. And we know, as Dr. Sami has presented, we know that the top 0.1% of the US people controls maybe 22, 23% of the wealth. And the top 1% takes that to more than 50%. So more than 50% of the American economy is controlled only by 1% of the people, which is about maybe 3 million something. And then the remaining 10% of the people controls, it takes the control up to some 75%. And the rest of the people, they, maybe 40% of the Americans owe less than $400 in their bank accounts, which means that they actually owe nothing. And even this 10%, everybody, anybody who lived in the US and is following the US knows that these people are always threatened. Even if you are working in a good job, making good money, having your house, having your cars and all that, if you lose your job, you can lose everything in just one moment. So we're talking about a society that is being controlled and led by only 1% or even less than that. So this is causing, of course, a lot of problems. If you add to that the intrinsic part that has been going all through the American history, which is the discrimination, against color, and also the kind of treatment that minorities receive, particularly recently under President Trump. You can add to that other social factors in terms of the absence of the values, the real values of the family, and the important role of the family in the American society, which has been one of the things that Americans always have taken pride of. Right now, more than 50% of what you can call families in the U.S. is actually not the normal form of families. It is not a man and wife getting married and having children. More than 50% is either man and wife living together without marriage, or man and wife, man and man living together, or woman and woman living together, or single mothers, so on and so forth. So there is actually a great threat to the basic value, family value of the US. So the American dream doesn't seem to be very much working as has been proposed. There is the feeling by the people that the country doesn't belong to them. They cannot actually affect the policies that are taken in the country. Makes people, very few people go to elections and practice their right for elections. And even if they do that, they cannot take whoever they want to represent them. The representation itself is designed in order to make the political life controlled by a set of elite. This is something that we can maybe illustrate more during questions and answers. But anyway, I mean, there is a lot of issues that have been growing particularly over the last 20 years, and the observer who is interested in the US can clearly see. But normally, all over the world, these observations maybe have been hidden because a lot of people have been having their own problems in other parts of the world. But what the coronavirus did, and actually the developments over the last 3 months, highlighted these problems and magnified them, and actually expedited a lot of the problems that have been happening. They did not create the problems. This is very important to notice. The problems we are seeing now in the US have not been created in the last 3 months. No, they have been there, they have been rising, but they have, during the last 3 months, they have very much been expedited in a very quick way. Some people, I've read some articles talking about the US. I remember somebody was saying that if you look at the US now, compare that to the US 3 months ago, it is as if you are living in a totally new country, as if you moved to another country. And you have a pandemic that hit more than 2 million of the people and caused death of more than 100,000 people until now. In order to understand the size of this, the whole dilemma that the US got the world into was because of what happened in the World Trade Center back in 2001, and the death toll was like 3,000 people, and that caused a great kind of grievances and deep sadness within the American society. Talking about 3,000. Now we're talking about 100,000 within 3 months. Of course, definitely the economy is almost shut down. We have more than 40 million people until now added to the unemployment record, which is unprecedented. Even during the time of the Great Depression back in 1929. During the crisis, the financial crisis in 2008, it was just that. It was a financial crisis. It was about money. So printing some money, less than $1 trillion, helped get out of that crisis, at least partially. The problem now is that the crisis is not just financial, it is financial and economical. And the two main elements of the economy are hit. That is supply and demand. Both of them have been hit. Of course, because of the shutdown and the lack of supply chains and all that, the supply has been severely affected. Nobody is producing. And also at the same time, nobody has money. So the demand has diminished. So we have a basic economic problem that is there to stay for a long time. Again, of course, it helps if the US keeps printing money, but as the problem is not just financial, it is economical, so it can stay for a much longer time. Now we see, everybody was stunned by the scenes of cars standing in queues or parking in queues to get financial support or to get money from camps that are distributing monies. And we see people going there with their Mercedes, with their BMWs, and the point is that this is probably among the 10% I was talking about. People who used to have a job, they may have a house, they have cars, but all this, they buy this, as you all know, they buy them by credit, by debt, so they remain in debt for almost their entire life. But there is no problem. As their income keeps generating, they don't have a problem. Now, I don't have food in my house. Although I have the BMW parked outside, but I don't have food, and I don't have a job, so I have to drive to a camp to get supply, to get help. And if you add, of course, on top of that, what we have been seeing over the last 2 or 3 weeks, these unrests and protests and violent scenes and looting and all that, which makes you feel as if you are in any of the poor third world countries. Okay, so all this definitely together, all this has happened only over the last 3 months. So this magnified the picture. It made people realize that the American society and the American ability to keep leading the world is very much being reduced. Definitely, this did not affect the presence of the military in military bases all over the world. It did not affect the ability of the US to print money, but the society is suffering, and this is one of the main reasons that could threaten any empire, or any country. If these severe problems within the society are taking place, this is major. And if you add to that a president who lacks the basic skills of leadership, his main hobby is to keep pouring oil on fires. Whenever there is a fire, he loves to keep pumping oil. There is no leadership, and he's pushing. He has always, for the last 3 years, he has also been pushing the US from leadership in the world. America first, and all these things. And of course, this is and will be expedited by what is happening right now. So if you add to that there is some expansion of other rising powers like China, like Russia, and I'll get to that in a moment. Definitely not to the extent that they replace the US in the leadership of the world, and this has always been a question that is raised during discussions and seminars like this one. Is China going to replace the US as the first power? Or Dr. Mohammed Makram, I'm sure, have been getting a lot of these questions. Dr. Sami Arian, and all of us have been getting these questions. Of course, this is not going to happen like that. It's not happening like that. But definitely, there is a room that is being created by the receding tactics and practice of the US that has been happening a lot lately. If we analyze the vacuum that is, in order to understand and get to the Middle East, the vacuum that has been left by the US is being filled in the following manner, in my opinion. First of all, it started by the realization of the US after President George W. Bush that they have put a lot of attention on the Middle East on the expense of ignoring the rising power of China. So they found out themselves in front of a giant that they did not pay enough attention to. So starting President Obama, the policy has changed, and more attention was given to Asia and to China in particular, on the expense of trying to reduce, not leaving out, but reducing the presence and the interest of the US in the Middle East, and leaving some room for others to come and fill. Due to this, of course, there are a lot of details about all what I'm talking about. I'm just touching headlines. Maybe during discussions we can cover, but I'm giving this panoramic view, eagle eye, as they say, in order to understand the introduction of what I'm going to say right now about the US policy in the Middle East, or what's happening in the Middle East actually. The space that has been allowed by the US is being filled by three main mechanisms, in my opinion. The first one is the rising, as I said, the rising power of some other powers, particularly China and Russia. And I'll just give you the headlines, and then I'm going to explain later on. So this is the first mechanism. So some of the space is being filled by China and Russia. The second mechanism is that you find some regional powers that are conglomerating their influence, maybe having some alliances or without alliances, whatever, trying to expand and having some influence which is higher, sometimes much higher than it used to be maybe 20 years ago. We're talking specifically about Iran, about Turkey, about the Emirates and Saudi Arabia. And so this is the second. So some of the areas are taken by these regional powers and these alliances. Some of them, of course, cooperate with the other major powers, but they themselves, they have their own agenda. The third mechanism is the expansion of the autocratic regimes in our areas, simply because they don't find anybody objecting to what they are doing, and actually they are being supported, and they act like agent states, client states for the main powers to to play specific roles in the area. A very clear example of this, of course, is the current Egyptian regime headed by General Sisi. So you find the expansion of these autocratic regimes also taking and occupying some of the areas left by the American recession. Let me explain a little bit more, and this would be my last part of the presentation, and give some examples. When we talk about the Middle East in particular, probably the role that China is taking right now, until right now, is not major. Dr. Mohammed, maybe in a comment or so, maybe can explain that, Dr. Mohammed Makram, a little bit later. But China seems to be more interested in Asia now than the Middle East, and they have their own agenda. But the main player who is getting heavily into the Middle East is definitely Russia. And although Russia does not have the qualifications in no way to come near the US or even China, but still they have the very strong military capabilities that allow them to play a very important part in our region. And they are not being faced. Sometimes Russia is even allowed by the US to play that role. And there are different examples. We have the example of Syria, which is very clear. Russia has been introduced into Syria, as they claim, by the call of the Syrian regime. But since then, they became the #1 player in Syria. Of course, a lot of details about that, but this is very clear to everybody. What may not be clear to some people not from our area is the rising role of Russia in Egypt. Egypt has been traditionally, for the last more than 40 years, a zone of influence for the U.S., of course, after the peace treaty with Israel, after the Egyptian peace treaty with Israel. And since then, the U.S. was the #1 player in Egypt. And sometimes a role lately, particularly after the coup, some role has been given to France to have a big influence in Egypt. But lately, Russia has become a major player in Egypt. They have a big military presence in Western Egypt, in what is called Mohammed Naguib Base, military base, and it is mainly serving their purposes for Libya. They have secured a contract with the Egyptian regime to build a nuclear power plant in the north coast that is going to, they are going to provide a loan of $25 billion in addition to another $5 billion from Egypt. And and of course, this is a major investment that is being produced to push for a big influence of Russia in Egypt. What we are seeing right now is also a big influence, a rising influence, which has been happening only lately in Libya. This is actually quite important and quite strategic. Why? Because if we talk about the distribution of influence between the big powers over the last, maybe after the World War II, traditionally, you can say that Syria has been part of the domain of influence of the Soviet Union, and nobody feels very bad if Russia now is having an influence in Syria. Actually, the US have certain interests that would like to maintain in Syria and in that region, but they don't mind, the US doesn't mind that Russia becomes the main player in Syria. A lot of details about that, but that has been the case. But what is new right now is that not just Egypt or Libya, the whole of North Africa has been a domain of influence of the US and NATO, whether the US directly or forces like France or Italy, whatever. That influence is being challenged right now by Turkey, and this is a strategic change, and actually needs to be observed whether this will continue or not. And the example of Libya is very clear in that. Libya started not far ago to support Khalifa Haftar, who is challenging the legitimate government, the National Accord government, and they have been very actually visible in providing this support lately, to the extent that they are, Haftar has been going and coming from Moscow many times, and they are sending now planes, Sukhoi and MiG, sophisticated planes that are based in Jafra air base in Libya, and doing missions over there. And it is clear, following the events in Libya, maybe some of you are not following closely, but Haftar was actually very close of controlling the whole country a few months ago, until a very sound and prominent interference took place by Turkey, supporting the legitimate government, which helped the government of the National Accord government to expel Haftar forces almost from the whole of the western part of Libya. Of course, there is that is governed by Tripoli, the Libyan capital. And that happened actually relatively easily without objection from anybody. The US maybe endorsed this kind of Turkish interference because they wanted to limit the Russian role in Libya. And it seems that Russia itself didn't mind that Turkey expels Haftar from the western part of Libya. But those of you who are following what's happening now in Libya, it seems that Russia put a red line for the advancement of the legitimate Libyan army, which is a line joining the city of Sirte and Al Jufra air base. Nobody's saying that, of course, in public, but there are very clear indications that this is the case. And it seems that Russia is pleased, or will be pleased, of having major influence in the eastern part of Libya, where most of the oil is being produced and exported, which gives Russia a lot of influence. Of course, Russia is not interested in the oil itself. Russia doesn't lack oil, but to be there, to be based there on the Mediterranean, in that critical part of the Middle East, and also in addition of being present in Syria, in Eastern Mediterranean, this will give Russia major leverage facing Europe and major strategic advantage, which puts Russia in a very strong position if it wants to negotiate with Europe or NATO on any issue, like the Ukraine, for example, or anything like that. So this is strategic. And it seems if we go back to the United States, it doesn't seem to me that the US is doing enough to prevent this from happening. Although this is a strategic, as I said, this is a strategic change. Even a few days ago, Sisi, who is clearly supporting Haftar, proposed an initiative, what he called the peace initiative, of course, very clearly coordinated with Russia. But the important thing is that it was also endorsed by the US. So what is going on? I mean, how come the US is trying to push for a treaty that will continue Haftar to be controlling the eastern part of Libya, while he is very heavily supported by Russia? Of course, Haftar himself used to be the US man. Of course, Haftar has worked with the US intelligence for a long time, but now what we are talking about is that his continuation in that part of Libya will give major leverage to Russia in there. So this is when it comes to how Russia is trying to take advantage of the vacuum that is being left by the US. If we talk about the second factor, which is the regional forces, it is very clear, of course, the role of Iran, for example, how the role of Iran expanded in Iraq following the US invasion and then the retreat. Iran is the main player right now in Iraq. And you add to that, of course, its role in Syria, in Lebanon, and in Yemen. So it expanded significantly in the area. Of course, again, a lot of details about that, but that is a role for Iran that is very clear, although Iran has been subject to major US sanctions and all that. The other player is the Emirates and the Saudis. The Emirates and the Saudis, particularly the Emirates, the Emiratis, is a very small country, but their way of expanding, of course, is making use of the huge wealth they have. But they made a strategic move, which is actually controlling Egypt. This is significant. It is as if the Emiratis are occupying Egypt right now. Normally, when you go and occupy a country, you put your military in order to make this occupation. Unfortunately, those who are making this role for the Emiratis is the Egyptian military that is controlling the country like now. So they are actually the agent for the Emiratis to control Egypt under what I call the military occupation of the Emirati occupation of Egypt. And of course, they have been expanding their influence significantly in the whole area, with a coalition with the Saudis, and both of them working under clear guidance from Israel, from the Zionist Kayan Sohyuni. So this is another example of the expansion of power of the regional powers. Also, Turkey lately has been playing a major role in the area. Of course, for many of us, this is a very positive role because it's balancing the negative roles played by Russia, by Iran, by the Emiratis, by everybody who is playing with the stability of and the well-being of the area. Although traditionally Turkey has been a country that is mainly concerned with its national security as defined by its own borders. When we talk, I found a few years back when we started to live here in Turkey, many times we had difficulties convincing our Turkish brothers that the national security extend beyond the Turkish borders. Very few people had a clear understanding of this, and I'm talking here about people from the AK party, not from the secularist parties or anything like that, because this has been the traditional theme of the state in Turkey. But lately, if you look, and definitely this is the vision of President Erdogan and few people around him. Lately, Turkey has been playing a major role in, starting maybe from Somalia. The Turkish embassy in Mogadishu is the largest in the world. So they have a major presence in Somalia as a start of presence in the African Horn area. 3 years back, they established major presence in Qatar, and they helped Qatar greatly to avoid the fate of a coup that had been planned by the Emiratis and the Saudis, and they managed to stop that. And Qatar right now is into a strategic alliance with Turkey, helping a lot of things not to happen from the other camp. Also, of course, the role of Turkey is significant in Syria. Maybe Turkey wasn't able to contribute significantly in reducing the control of the Russians and the Iranians in Syria, but at least they played a major role in helping millions of people fleeing Syria from the hell that is taking place in Turkey. And also they are resisting in order to guarantee that there is no absolute power of the Russians and the regime over the whole Syria. Whenever there is going to be negotiations in Syria, Turkey is going to be a very important player. Right now, the role they are playing in Libya is significant, and please follow up what is happening in Libya to understand the role that the Turkish people are playing and Turkey is playing in the whole zone of the Middle East. The third mechanism, and I'll end with that, is the autocratic regime, which are expanding in order to play a lot of roles to help other major powers. And in particular, we're talking about Egypt here. The regime in Egypt gets life from two major sources. One of them is the severe oppression that it is practicing inside Egypt. But more importantly, they are getting a lifeline from the international community for playing important roles on behalf of these international powers. And the result of that is that until now, we find that international community is very quickly helping the Sisi regime in every crisis. The latest example is the supply of very quick loans by the IMF, International Monetary Fund, to Egypt following the latest developments following the coronavirus and the economic repercussions in Egypt. the IMF they had already given Egypt 12 billion US dollars. Last month, a tranche of 2.8 additional US dollars were very quickly, in a matter of a week, were given to Egypt. And now they are approving a package of 5.2 billion US dollars. When in the year that we were in the government of Dr. Morsi, we were trying our best to secure some 4.5 billion US dollars just to indicate that Egypt is capable of attracting financial investments and financial support from the world. And we never could secure it over extensive negotiations for almost 1 year. Now we are talking about, we are getting into like 20 billion US dollars. Actually, Egypt now under Sisi is the second largest country receiving financial support from the IMF, I think after Pakistan. So this is an example how Egypt is being helped in order to maintain the role that it's playing. It's playing a major role in Libya by supporting Haftar and maintaining the interests of the West in that area, with big cooperation with Russia, as I explained, with big cooperation with France, and of course the Emiratis and the Saudis. Also, although Egypt did not send troops to Yemen, but they have provided support, military support through the Navy in the Red Sea area. Right now, Egypt is considered the second largest buyer of weaponry in the Middle East, and the third country in the whole world buying weapons this year and the previous year. Of course, this is quite important for the Western countries to flourish at the time of crisis that we are going through right now. That is why Egypt is being heavily supported by the West. So the expansion of the role of Egypt is one of the major mechanisms that is trying to sometimes be acting in line with the US interests, sometimes in line with even rivalries of the US like Russia. So it is time for me to conclude here. It is, as I am, just to summarize, the US has been going through significant developments and changes over the last maybe 20 years. And some of what is happening there has been there for even centuries, the discrimination and these issues. But the last 20 years have been significant in the triggering many changes within the US, affecting its superiority over the world, at least as a model. But the last 3 months have seen a lot of developments that enhanced what has been happening for a couple of decades, and magnified that. And with the presence of Trump, that led to a lot of recession of the leading role that the US is playing in the world. Again, I'm not saying that it left the #1 seat. No, of course it is #1, and it will be for some time. But the role is receding, and as one of the consequences of that is the role in the Middle East, leaving an area that is being filled partially. Of course, the US is still very influential in the Middle East, but now it has left a lot of areas for movement for countries like Russia, Iran, Turkey, the Emiratis, Egypt, so on and so forth, which I'm not sure. What is very interesting, actually, and I would like you to keep an eye of, is what is happening in Libya, because this is a really strategic development. And if Russia succeeds to dictate its presence in that part of the world and having a veto of the decisions that are being taken for the future of Libya, this is, in my opinion, a significant change of what has been happening over a long period of time. Thank you very much. Jazakumullah khair.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Amr. It's really been a very fruitful and a lot of opinions and informations. Let me give a brief summary. Dr. Amr actually began with the situation in the United States, especially under coronavirus. He said basically that whatever is going on actually was already there, but the coronavirus exposed the situation more of creating a new situation. And we could also see after the coronavirus a new United States, which many people actually didn't expect to see. Especially we're having Mr. Trump, who made things even worse. And the catastrophe which is faced by the United States nowadays is much bigger than 9/11 in its economic magnitude and the number of death cases. Although the United States could print a lot of USD, like $3 billion, but the real problem is that the economy itself is hit, especially that supply and demand chain. People are losing a lot of jobs, and they are more dependent on social support. There are a lot of racial riots. We have already witnessed the last one, which is impacting the image of the United States very severely. Also, although the situation is so negative and the picture has become very negative indeed, but this did not affect the military might of the United States. It has affected the society, but not the military might. We have also other dangers like the rising powers, especially China and Russia. When we talk about the Middle East, we have witnessed a new policy under President Obama, which was concentrating on Asia and the Chinese rise, and that left some spaces in the Middle East, and most probably we could expect other factors and players to intervene in the Middle East, but Dr. Amr enumerated 3 mechanisms in this respect. The first mechanism is the rising powers like China and Russia, and the second one is regional powers like Iran, Turkey, United Arab Emirates, and Saudi Arabia. Also, he talked about the expansion of autocratic regimes, especially Egypt. About China, it is very clear that China is more interested in Asia itself, not in the Middle East. The main power that is more interested, and it's now very clear, in the Middle East, which is Russia. Now, Russia is playing a very important role in many areas, especially in Syria and Libya, and Egypt as well. We are witnessing a rising role of Russia in Egypt, which was not very clear, and it makes a lot of sense in Syria and Libya, but not very much in Egypt. US is not doing enough to prevent what's happening in Libya, although they left some space for the Turkish government, but they are not doing enough in Libya. We have also the regional powers like Iran. Iran has expanded a lot in Russia, in Syria and Yemen, Lebanon as well, but it faces a lot of pressure from the United States, unlike Russia. We see also the Emirati role, which is a very dangerous role. Dr. Amr considers the United Arab Emirates occupying Egypt with partnership with the Saudis, and they are using the military there. All this is done under supervision and guidance from the Zionist entity. Dr. Amr also donated to the Turkish role, which he said that many people perceive as a balancing role, which is positive to many, especially in Somalia, Qatar, and Syria. The situation in Egypt is very alarming because we witness international support for the government, especially the IMF loan. Dr. Amr compared it with the situation under President Morsi, where the government tried for a whole year to ensure getting loan from IMF, but failed, while Sisi government has become the second country in terms of the volume of these loans. Finally, we witnessed the Egyptian role of supporting Haftar in Libya with the help and support from Russia and France. Egypt has become the second buyer of weapons in the Middle East and the third in the world. I think this sums up most of what Dr. Amr has already said. But I noticed that, Dr. Amr, you haven't concentrated a lot on the Israeli role. If you could elaborate on that, I would be very grateful.
Okay. Of course, I did not elaborate on the Israeli role because it usually comes under the US umbrella. I was trying to concentrate on the areas that have been left by by the US to be occupied by others. That's why I didn't talk a lot about or didn't even discuss about the Israeli entity, the Zionist entity, but definitely this is a totally a big story on itself. Due to what has been happening in our area, the retreats of the Arab Spring and the counter-revolutionary efforts, the Israeli role has been expanding, and Israel has assessed that under the current conditions and under the current U.S. administration, now is probably the time to secure another step further in the control of the whole area, not just Palestine. I'm not talking about just Palestine. I'm talking about the whole area. And the talk about the deal of the century, many people put it in the context of the Palestinian cause, but actually the deal of the century is much more than that. The Palestinian cause is the #1 item in the deal of the century. The deal of the century for Israel, from the Israeli perspective, is the total control of the whole area. Okay, and the change of the political, geographic, geostrategic, and even cultural mentality of people to accept the existence of Israel in the area and to abandon the basic values of Islam as we know it to a newly defined set of values, including a mixture of many things. So the change is also cultural as well. So, but in order for this change to happen, somehow the Palestinian cause has to be in a way settled, not necessarily in a just way, definitely not in a just way, but just to claim that, okay, we finished this file, let's move forward to another file. Of course, the Palestinian resistance is always rejecting what is being offered. But the terms of the deal of the century when it comes to Palestine are advancing regardless of what the opinion of the Palestinians or the resistance is. Trump moved the embassy to Jerusalem, announced Jerusalem as the eternal capital of Israel, and now they are preparing for a major event, which I believe is going to have major repercussions, which is the annexation of 30% of the West Bank, which is basically killing any opportunity for having an independent Palestinian state and killing the so-called peace process. Of course, for me, the peace there hasn't been any peace process, but real peace process. But now we talk about the end, the official end. As we say in Egypt, "Ikram al-Mayyit dafnu." This is the burial of the. So there is great experience of this, and the second step would be the acceptance of Israel in the area with normalized relations with everybody. Before, actually, I remember when these attempts started back in the 1990s, yes, we were talking about normalization, which is like accepting the presence of Israel in the region. But right now, what normalization means is accepting the leadership of Israel in the region. This has to be very clear for everybody.
This reminds me with a book written by the former president of Israel and former prime minister. It is called The New Middle East, if you remember the book. And he actually predicted and called for the situation.
Yes.
Shimon Peres.
Shimon Peres, yes, in the 90s, yeah, that's right.
Okay, then.
So we're talking about, let me finish just, Dr. Mohammed. So Israel is still very well connected to the US interests. And this is one of the reasons, actually, the US feels a little bit more relaxed in giving this room, because it has a very honest ally in the region. But nevertheless, Israel is representing its own interests and is now that what is dangerous that it is getting into a clear alliance with the major powers, remaining powers in the area, the Arab world, including the Emirates, the Saudis, and the Egyptian regime, unfortunately, trying to kill any kind of change in the region. This is being resisted, and this is our coming battle, I believe, the battle of the Muslim Ummah and all the free people in the world, not just Muslims in our area, I mean, to resist this kind of control. And I believe what is happening in Libya right now is considered, or can be considered, a major step in stopping this attack from the counter-revolution. But unfortunately, Russia again is playing a major role in doing that. So this is something to watch carefully. But overall, Israel has very strategic relationships, not just with the US, but also with Russia. We have to understand that.
I wanted to come to a very important question raised by one of our participants here about the future of the Arab Spring, because you have already presented a picture which is unfortunately not that positive. It is, although we have to be realistic, this is the reality, but many actually expect to present some kind of solution or hope, especially Arab Spring represented that kind of hope. You were a leader in that era, and most probably you're very acquainted and know very well how it happened, and if it is possible to repeat it, or if it is the right way to free this area from tyranny and serving the West powers.
Let me give you my perspective in this. First of all, I personally, I don't like the term Arab Spring. It is trying to replicate what happened back in the 90s in Eastern Europe. But actually, what started to happen is the beginning of a total change in the area that is there to stay. not just a spring that is followed by a summer and autumn and winter, which we are going through right now. But anyway, let's use the term yani, just for the sake of discussion. In my opinion, the picture is not the future. The picture of the future is not very dark. Actually, to me, it is very bright. Definitely, we shouldn't expect tens of years of not just tyranny. Yani, tyranny is something that is there, but more importantly, this is a representation of the occupying powers that used to control the area. And when the occupation left our area in the 1950s and 60s, officially, I mean, they left regimes that are their agents and their representatives in governing the people without them having to be there in our areas. So we are under the same kind of occupation that we have been going through. Actually, it's a worse. Yani in Egypt, for example, under the British occupation, we used to have democratic life, which is much more lively than it is right now, definitely. But anyway, the tyranny that is there representing the interest. So this is a result not just of the 70 years of military rule or tyranny, but it's also the resultant and the aspiration of the people to get out altogether of the control of the West, quote unquote, but the West, this includes also Russia and any hegemonic power. But so this is a hope for getting out of this control into building an kind of independent area with independent will to take our faith in our own hands. This is what is so-called Arab Spring is about. So we shouldn't expect this to be something that is resolved in 18 days or 1 year or 2 years or 3. Actually, if this did not happen, we should have thought that there was something wrong. If this major reaction that took place against the uprising in the area didn't take place, there will be something strange. Actually, this is major, and I acknowledge that this is a major counterattack. But what is important is that we see that the resistance is still there. Nobody, yani inside people, even those who are not doing anything, they still believe that it's not over. Whenever there is a problem, for example, in Egypt or Yemen or Syria, you find people rising in Algeria, in Lebanon, in Iraq, and so on and so forth. Whenever there is an opportunity, you find people rising. But I'll come to an interesting point in my opinion. When the Arab Spring started to happen, the model that people were looking at is the liberal model, a sort of the democracy that is prevailing in the West, in the US. These people are enjoying their lives, enjoying their economy, enjoying the democracy, and this is what we are looking up to. And this would have been probably the model that we would have copied, afterwards, whether Islamists or non-Islamists. I mean, during the year that the late Dr. Morsi was in power, not much change actually took place in the institutions, in the mechanisms. Right now, what is happening in the whole world, actually, in my opinion, is exposing this model, and this is what is very important. So when the change is going to happen in our area, it is not going to be looking up to that model. Definitely, it's going to be looking at a model for freedom of the people, freedom of opinion, end of tyranny, all that, yes. But the model of governance, the model of living, the model, definitely, we will have to develop and work on our own model that is not more based than anything else other than Islam, of course. Yeah, so this is probably what is happening right now is a motive for the area to move forward. And this is in my opinion, what is happening right now is an introduction a real change that's going to happen in the area.
Okay, let's leave the floor for more questions. If anybody has a question, please, or comment maybe. Abu Amr, would
Dr.
you
Mohammed,
open the
can I
mic?
speak? Don't know.
Yeah, Ahmed.
Okay, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thanks, Dr. Amr, for this insightful introduction. Yani, really, it's very appreciated. Dr. Amr, can you give us a little perspective about the upcoming US elections? What's the prospect for Joe Biden? Will he have any opportunities to run that, to win that elections? Because
Okay.
that will make a lot of change in the US policy regarding the Middle East, of course. Yeah.
I'm not sure about that, but anyway, to your second conclusion, but of course I'll try to be brief, to touch upon that based on what I know. But we have an expert here, Dr. Samir Ayan, who is with us, who can talk more about that. But people have to understand that the election system in the US is not like a system that is going to give a chance for the free will of the people to choose their president. The system is based on representatives that are selected from different states. Okay, and if you get the majority of representatives in one state, you get the whole state. And since a long time ago, we know for sure that more than 40 states are controlled either by Republicans or Democrats. So there is no point actually for candidates to even campaign in these states. Everybody usually is fighting over maybe 7 or 8 states who they call swing states that really determine the fate of the elections. And this does not depend also in the majority of the people. It depends on a lot of financial interests, a lot of media input, a lot of dirty work, and you can in many occasions the president of the United States reach his position without having the majority of votes of the Americans, maybe with the exception of Obama, President Obama. So in order to try to analyze this, don't really be fooled. None of us should be fooled by the polls that say that Biden is having a 10% lead or 5% or whatever. We have to look more closely to these swing states and what's happening. Now, in my opinion, maybe before the pandemic, in my opinion, Trump had a very good opportunity of winning back the elections. And maybe he's suffering now because of what's happening in the US, the developments that I explained. But the problem is that, if you don't like Trump, the problem is that the solid base of Trump, which is about 35 to 40% of the American people, is behind him no matter what happens. And if the US becomes broke, they are still behind him. And the other opponent, which is Joe Biden, is not a very strong opponent. As a matter of fact, he suffered significantly in order to reach this position. And he's not that kind of leader that the US would be looking for to go through this crisis. He's not like Obama, for example, although I have a negative opinion of Obama, but still he's not like Obama. So whether or not Biden is able to win or not, this is still too early to judge. And I believe that the opportunity now, right, in my opinion, is like 50-50. What I don't agree with you is that the election of Biden would mean an automatic change of the US policy in the region. The US policy in the region or any part of the world, the foreign policy is determined by a set of very complicated factors, including by institutions, including the Pentagon, the intelligence, the State Department, and the presidency, of course, national security. So this is something that is not determined by the president. Of course, the president has a very good power in running foreign policy. But yet, for a strategic change to happen, this requires a lot of things. Now, Trump, as I said, continued along actually the same lines that Obama was following. I mean, he continued retreat from the Middle East in order to be able to concentrate more on Asia and China. Okay, and Trump is no different than that. And probably if Biden comes, Biden was the vice president of Obama, and he's probably go along with the same policy. But what is interesting, and as I said, although the US is giving an area, it is still more or less overlooking the whole scene in the Middle East and allow things to happen or not to happen. But that's why I refer to the Russian presence in Libya as a strategic change, because this is a new factor that hasn't been there traditionally. In North Africa, the presence of Russia in North Africa in general. So if Biden and his administration would fight hard not to prevent that, this is yet to be seen. But I'm sure that the election of the president, the coming president, will mostly depend on internal agenda in the US other than foreign agenda.
I don't know if anybody else has a question.
Assalamu alaikum. I am Dr. Muhammad Noor.
Yes, please go ahead, brother.
I have a question. Doctor, I am also a PhD in engineering from IIT Delhi.
Why? How? We are colleagues then.
Yes. So just a related question, because you were there. So what about the campuses? How bad is racism in the campuses? And the other question is, the American economy has taken a beating, but how they will fare as far as world powers are concerned, like Russia and China, etc. Post-COVID.
I'm not sure I got the second part, but let me start with the first one, and then I'll get with the second part.
Okay.
First, I'm not an expert in the internal social movement in the US, but when I was there, actually, I got my PhD from Purdue University, which is a university in Indiana, in the heart of the Midwest, and that was in the 1980s, between 1984 and 1987, and at that time, actually. The racism that we might be seeing very highly magnified right now, I didn't feel it that much when I was at Purdue, and as a matter of fact, at that time, that was the time when Nelson Mandela was getting a great international support all over the world in the movement in South Africa, and the anti-discrimination and all that, and the whole of the US society, and the majority of the US society was behind supporting Mandela, and maybe having songs, actually even top chart songs about freeing Nelson Mandela and all that. That was a model then. So the issue of racism and discrimination was not that much visible at that time. But for right now, I don't have a picture because I haven't been in campuses for a long time. Can I have the second part, please?
The second was post-COVID. What kind of the American economy has taken a beating? How they will stand as vis-a-vis the world powers?
Yeah. Well, actually, the COVID-19 is affecting everybody all over the world. So it is affecting the US and also affecting China and Russia. And actually, Russia is affected also by another factor, which is the decline of the oil prices. And Russia has been having economic difficulties for a long time. I mean, this is not new. So when it comes to the economy, everybody is suffering. China, of course, is suffering. I mean, China's economy, maybe it will be growing with a very small percentage, down from a moderate growth of like 6% It used to be 10% or even more. But at least it's not shrinking. But anyway, it is suffering. Yani the Chinese economy is suffering. The U.S. economy, of course, is suffering as well. But as I said, the U.S. is the only country that is capable of printing money without being accountable for that. They can keep on printing and printing, and whenever they have deficiency, they will keep printing. But as I said again, also that the problem is not just financial, it's not just money. It is also economical with the great reduction of both supply and demand. So the whole world is suffering. We will probably be looking, and this is something that we are putting a close eye on. We are going to get a new model of the world economy, in my opinion, but the outlines of that world will not be clear before maybe 1 year or 2 years from now. But definitely the picture will be changing. This, and if the US continues to have the ability to keep printing money, no major change will happen, in my opinion. But if for some reason something major happened that makes the international trade, and particularly the oil trade, is done in another currency, that will be it for the US. That would be the end of the US economy.
Okay, Dr. Amr.
I'm sorry?
I think we don't have enough time now.
Yeah. Okay.
Let's try to conclude. And before that, let's take the last question. If anybody has a question or comment.
Yes, I have a question. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu rahmatullah. Yes, Dr. Sayed.
I am Dr. Syed Asaf Ali. I have done my PhD from Jamia Millia Islamia in biotechnology. And I'm right now working as a faculty in a school out here in New Delhi, India.
Nice to have you on.
Yes. It was a wonderful lecture. I congratulate and thank Dr. Amr and the organizers. It was a wonderful lecture. My question is that as per the lecture and as per our understanding, the most of the establishment in the US and the Middle East has been under the control of the Zionists. My question is very straightforward, that what is the future of Zionism? Because according to the ahadith of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we are heading towards the Akhiruz Zaman. So what is the future of the Zionism and the tools of the Dajjal in Akhiruz Zaman?
Well, I'm not very, I'm not an expert in Hadith Akhir Zaman, so I'm not going to talk about that part. But which, by the way, I'm one of the believers that we are getting close to that. But anyway, but this is not for me to talk about. But maybe I can challenge part of what you said, which is the U.S. is controlled by Zionism. I don't think this is the cause. This is the case. Of course, Zionism and the Zionist lobbies are very important in the U.S. And this is different, by the way, than Jews. And if you look at Jews in the U.S., you'd find that maybe 75% of them are not supporting Netanyahu's policies, for example. But when we talk about the Zionist influence, we're talking about Zionist lobby like AIPAC, and more importantly, the evangelical, the evangelicist people, the Christian, the majority Protestant in the U.S. who have in their faith a very solid belief that we are, as you said, we are heading towards the end of time, and there will be a great battle, the Battle of Armageddon, and that at the end of that battle, Christ will come down and rule the world. Yeah, this is what they have in mind, and but they claim that they are with Israel. They have the same thing, but actually their views are conflicting. Yeah, if you go into it,
what is their role in controlling the Arab regimes? Yes. Because most of them are just fulfilling the purposes of the Zionist regimes, like Assisi and the other regimes also.
No, this is what I'm getting at. controlling the Arab regimes and influencing the US policies in general is not just dictated by Zionists. There is also the influence of the big companies, the military industry, a lot of big financial interests. Maybe the role of the Zionists is more pronounced in the Middle East, yes, because of the presence of the State of Israel, and definitely the Zionist trend in the U.S. is supporting the current right-wing government in Israel, and they are very much in line with the concept of the deal of the century that I was explaining a few minutes earlier. And this will be as long as Trump is president, this will continue to be pushed. But this doesn't mean that, again, that if Biden comes, this would significantly change. Maybe the support of dictator regimes like Sisi, for example, maybe will be a little bit less than Trump, but I don't think it will be like people thought during the time of Obama. Although actually, in reality, during the time of Obama, the coup took place in Egypt, and it was supported afterwards by the Obama administration itself. So I don't think there's going to be a significant change in this in the U.S. policy because of the very strong connection, as you said, with the Zionist interests in the area. And it's not just a matter of election; it's a matter of a directive, one of the fixed constants of the U.S. policy to continue the support and the well-being of the state of as Sisi, for example, is one of the major supporters and the one who is being supported by the Israeli state. Definitely, as long as he's doing this, he will be supported by the U.S. Administration, no matter what administration it will be.
Thank you,
Also,
Dr.
the dollar printing is done by the federal bank, isn't it? Which is owned by the Zionist.
I'm sorry?
We have to conclude.
Printing of dollars.
I think we have
printing
to
of the dollars
now because we already we've been our time is almost up, and we have to conclude. And if you have more questions, I think Dr. Amr would be very kind to provide his email, and also he's the chairman of the Egyptian Institute, so you could also to refer to their website for more details. Anyhow, we will also provide a summary for today's talk. It will be on our website and Facebook, and the lecture is also recorded and it will be posted on the YouTube channel. Dr. Amr, thank you very much for participating with us. We hope in the future. We hope that in the future we'll be hosting you again and again, and most of the brothers here, they are very active in different social arenas, and we have people from India, Turkey, Malaysia, I don't know, maybe other countries as well. So thank you very much for attending, and see you, inshallah, in future events. Thank you very much.
Thank you.